I was sitting in that courtroom watching my entire life get dismantled by a woman I'd loved for 43 years. My attorney had stopped fighting an hour ago. I could see it in his posture, the way he kept glancing at me with something worse than pity resignation. Elaine sat at the opposing table, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she pulled from her sleeve, and the judge was leaning toward her the way people lean toward someone who needs protection. I was 69 years old, and I was about to lose my home, my retirement, my reputation. Everything I'd spent a lifetime building, gone. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because she'd learned how to cry on cue and I'd never learned how to defend myself against someone I trusted. Her attorney was mid-sentence, something about the trauma his client had endured when the courtroom doors opened. I didn't turn around at first. I'd stopped expecting anything good to walk through any door. But then the room shifted. I felt it before I saw it. Elaine's posture went rigid, her hand frozen mid-dab, the tissue crumpled against her cheek. I turned. David, my son. The son who hadn't returned my calls in 2 years, who'd missed my 70th birthday, who I'd convinced myself had chosen her side because that's what children do when marriages collapse and mothers cry. He walked down the center aisle carrying a laptop, his face composed, his steps unhurried. He didn't look at his mother, he looked at the judge. Your Honor, he said, I apologize for the interruption. But my mother has been lying to this court. I have 847 days of proof. Elaine made a sound I'd never heard from her before, something between a gasp and a word that didn't quite form. The judge raised her hand to silence the room. And I sat there, frozen, not understanding, not daring to hope, watching my son stand where I couldn't stand, holding something I couldn't see. I should tell you before I go further, I'm sharing this story because I lived it, but names and certain details have been changed. Not to protect anyone who doesn't deserve protection, but because the patterns matter more than the particulars. I've learned that what happened to me happens to more people than anyone wants to admit. Men and women my age, sitting in courtrooms or kitchens or assisted living facilities, watching everything they built get taken by someone who was supposed to love them. Too many of us suffer this silently. Too many of us believe we're alone. So I'm asking you, if you're watching this, leave a comment, tell me where you're from, your city, your country. I want to know who's listening. It helps me feel less alone in this, and maybe it'll help you feel less alone too. But I should start at the beginning. 43 years before that courtroom. I met Elaine in the fall of 1980 at a community college where I was teaching night classes in bookkeeping. I was 26. 3 years into building what would become a career in forensic accounting, the kind of work where you learn to read what people don't want you to see. She was 23, finishing a business certificate, and she laughed at something I said during a lecture about depreciation. Nobody laughs at depreciation jokes. I noticed her immediately. We married the following summer in a ceremony so small we outnumbered the guests. Our first apartment had radiators that clanked like percussion instruments and a kitchen where 2 people couldn't stand at the same time. We didn't care. We were building something. My father came to the wedding, already sick with the cancer that would take him 8 months later. Before the ceremony, he pressed something into my palm, a pocket watch, silver, worn smooth at the edges from decades in his pocket. I turned it over and read the engraving on the back. Time means nothing without someone to share it with. He told me his father had given it to him on his wedding day, and now it was mine. I wore it in my vest pocket when I said my vows. When David graduated from college, I continued the tradition. I gave him the watch the morning of his commencement, told him the same thing my father told me. He held it like it was fragile, like it mattered. I thought it would anchor him the way it had anchored me. Those early years with Elaine were real. I have to believe that, or nothing makes sense. I built my practice, client by client, learning to follow money through the mazes people construct to hide it. Elaine raised David, managed our household, supported my late nights and weekend work with patience I tried never to take for granted. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We were careful. We accumulated slowly a house, then a better house, retirement accounts, a life. I thought I knew her. 43 years, and I thought I knew her. The first anomalies started about 4 years ago. though I didn't recognize them as anomalies at the time. I recognized them as changes, and I told myself that people change after 40 years together, that it would be strange if they didn't. Elaine began attending wellness retreats, weekend programs at spas or conference centers, sometimes 3 or 4 hours away. She'd never shown interest in such things before, but I told myself it was healthy. She was 64. She deserved to focus on herself. When I asked about the retreats, she answered in generalities: meditation, yoga, workshops on stress reduction. I asked once if I could come along, maybe find a program for couples. She looked at me like I'd suggested something absurd. "This is my time, Richard. You're smothering me." She'd never used that word before. Smothering. It stayed with me longer than it should have. Then there were the small financial discrepancies. I noticed them because noticing is what I do. It's the instinct you develop after 35. Years of examining ledgers for what doesn't belong. A credit card statement with hotel charges in a city she hadn't mentioned visiting. A withdrawal from our joint savings account, $3,000 for the house, she said. But no repair appeared. No contractor came. When I mentioned it, she told me I was being paranoid. "You're tracking my spending now? Is this what we've become?" I apologized. I stopped asking. David, meanwhile, began to seem distant in ways I couldn't name. He'd always called every few days, visited for Sunday dinners at least twice a month. Now the calls were shorter. The dinners got canceled work conflicts, he said, or travel. He was vague in ways he'd never been. I blamed myself, wondered if I was becoming the kind of old man who repeated stories, who forgot he'd already said something, who his son didn't want to be around. What I couldn't ignore was the whispering. Elaine and David, huddled in conversations that stopped the moment I entered a room. Quick glances between them, phones tucked away mid-sentence. I found it strange, but I didn't find it suspicious. My 70th birthday was approaching. I convinced myself they were planning something. I felt excluded, a little hurt, but I told myself it was love taking a shape I didn't recognize. I was half right. Something was being planned. It just wasn't for me. 3 months before I sat in that courtroom, Elaine handed me divorce papers across our kitchen table. She did it on a Tuesday morning, after I'd made coffee for both of us, the way I had every morning for 4 decades. She set the envelope beside my cup and said, "I think you should read this when I'm not here." Then she picked up her purse and left. The grounds were listed as irreconcilable differences, which tells you nothing. The petition's claims told me everything, or what she wanted everyone to believe was everything. According to her filing, I was emotionally abusive, controlling. I had isolated her from friends and family. There were suggestions, carefully worded, that I might be experiencing cognitive decline. That she feared for her financial security if she remained dependent on a man whose faculties were failing. I read it 3 times. My hands were steady, which surprised me. The financial demands were staggering. She wanted the house. 70% of our retirement assets. Spousal support indexed to inflation. The document painted a picture of a woman who had sacrificed her life for a man who repaid her with cruelty, and who now deserved to be made whole. I tried to call David. No answer. I tried again the next day and the next. Nothing. His voicemail was full. My emails went unanswered. I stopped trying after 2 weeks because every attempt felt like pressing on a wound that wouldn't close. He'd chosen her. That's what I told myself. Children choose sides in divorce, and he'd chosen the parent who wasn't me. I hired an attorney, a woman named Carolyn, who came recommended by a colleague from my old firm. She was honest with me in ways I didn't want to hear. Elaine's lawyer was aggressive, she said. The narrative being built was compelling. "At your age," she told me carefully, "judges sometimes assume decline even without medical evidence. The suggestion is enough to create doubt." So I did what I've been trained to do. I started examining the finances myself, quietly, methodically, the way I'd examined hundreds of clients' records over the decades. I requested statements Elaine thought I'd never bother to read. I cross-referenced transactions against calendar entries. I followed the money. What I found was the real story. There were accounts I'd never known about, accounts in her name only, funded by systematic transfers from our joint holdings over the past 3 years. Brokerage accounts, a money market fund, a checking account at a bank I'd never heard of. The transfers were small enough not to trigger alerts, large enough to add up. And there was the condo, a two-bedroom property in another state purchased 18 months prior, titled in her name alone. The down payment had come from our home equity line, a line I'd apparently connived for, though I had no memory of doing so. The signature on the application wasn't quite my handwriting. It was close, but I know my own hand. Elaine had been building an exit for years. She'd been moving money, acquiring assets, constructing a life that didn't include me, all while smiling across the breakfast table and accepting the coffee I made her every morning. I should have been angrier. I think I was too devastated for anger. Anger requires energy, and I had none left. But I still didn't know about David. I had a choice to make. I could confront Elaine with what I'd found, the secret accounts, the condo, the forged signature, or I could keep digging. Keep quiet. See what else emerged. My attorney advised settlement. Fighting will drain you, she said, financially, emotionally. At your age, Richard, you have to weigh whether being right is worth what it will cost to prove it. I almost agreed. I was tired in a way I'd never been tired before, not sleepy, hollowed out. I started drafting an email to Carolyn, telling her to negotiate the best terms she could, that I was done fighting. Then, late one night, my computer chimed with an incoming message. The sender address was a string of random characters, the kind of encrypted anonymity I recognized from fraud cases. The message contained one line. Dad, don't give up. Don't say anything. I'm on your side. More soon. No signature. No explanation. But I knew my son's voice, even in text. There was a cadence to how he writes, a rhythm I'd recognize anywhere. This was David. I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at those words. I didn't understand. He hadn't spoken to me in nearly 2 years. He'd ignored every attempt I'd made to reach him. And now this message from the shadows, asking me to trust him without telling me why. Something shifted in me that night, not understanding. Not even hope, exactly. Just a flicker of something I'd thought was extinguished, a reason to wait. I deleted the draft to my attorney. I decided to play a different role. The next 2 months were the hardest acting of my life. I showed up to mediation sessions looking tired, distracted, older than I felt. I forgot details I knew perfectly well, dates of transactions, names of accounts, the sequence of events. When Elaine's attorney pressed me, I hesitated, rubbed my temples, asked for questions to be repeated. I watched Elaine across the table, watching me, and I saw satisfaction settle into her features like a cat watching a cornered mouse. Her attorney grew confident. He started pushing for more additional spousal support, a larger share of the retirement accounts, my agreement to cover her legal fees. In mediation, I agreed to unreasonable terms in principle, asked for time to think, made myself look like a man who just wanted the pain to stop. Elaine became careless. She made snide comments in front of the mediator's small cruelties she thought I was too diminished to register. He's always been slow with decisions, she said once. You should see him try to work his phone. She sent emails to her attorney that revealed her real expectations, her real contempt. I documented everything. I noted dates and times. I didn't react. Meanwhile, 2 more messages arrived from that anonymous address. Stay patient. And then, a week later, almost ready. I still didn't know what David had. I didn't know why he'd vanished or what he'd been doing in those 847 days of silence. Part of me wondered if I was a fool, trusting a son who'd let me believe he'd abandoned me. Part of me wondered if the messages were real at all, or if I was so desperate for hope that I'd imagined them. But the forensic accountant in me recognized something in the shape of those silences. I'd seen it before, in long-term investigations where the goal wasn't speed but completeness. Someone was building a case. Someone was gathering evidence that couldn't be rushed because rushing it would ruin everything. I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't show my hand. I couldn't even grieve openly because the man Elaine expected me to be was too confused for grief. I performed weakness while holding on to a faith I couldn't justify. I sat alone in the house that might not be mine for much longer, wearing the silence like a coat I couldn't take off. If David was working, I couldn't see him working. I could only wait. The final hearing arrived on a Thursday in March. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled, the kind of room where lives get rearranged while clerks take notes. Elaine's attorney delivered his closing arguments with the confidence of a man who knew he'd already won. Richard Ellison, he said, was a controlling husband who had gaslit his wife for decades. He had hidden money, made her feel dependent, driven his own son away with his coldness. Mrs. Ellison sought only what was fair, the security she'd been denied, the acknowledgement of her suffering, the freedom to spend her remaining years without fear. Elaine took the stand. She cried. She described years of walking on eggshells, of questioning her own memory because I told her she was wrong, of isolation so complete she didn't realize how alone she was until she finally found the courage to leave. Her voice trembled. Her hands shook. The judge leaned forward, and I could see sympathy forming like weather across her face. My attorney had done what she could, but the narrative was set. I was the villain. I watched the judge's expression and understood that the ruling was already written in her mind. We were just waiting for her to say it out loud. Then the courtroom doors opened. David walked in carrying his laptop. He was wearing a suit I'd never seen before, and his expression was calm in a way that reminded me suddenly, painfully, of my own father. He approached the bench and waited to be acknowledged. The judge looked at him, then at Elaine, then back. "Your Honor," David said, "I apologize for the unorthodox request. I'm David Ellison, the son of both parties. I have evidence directly relevant to these proceedings, and I'm asking the court's permission to present it," Elaine's attorney objected. Loudly, "This was irregular," he said. "Unprecedented. The evidence hadn't been disclosed in discovery." But Elaine herself cut him off. "That's not true," she said, her voice too sharp, too fast. "Whatever he has, it's fabricated. He's lying. He's always been—" "Mrs. Ellison," the judge's tone stopped her. "You'll have an opportunity to respond." She turned to David. "I'll allow a brief presentation. You may proceed." David connected his laptop to the courtroom's display. He faced the judge, not his mother, not me. "3 years ago," he said, "my mother approached me for help. She told me my father was hiding assets and becoming erratic. She was frightened," she said. "She needed someone who understood technology to help her document what was happening, to protect herself. I believed her." He clicked a key. What I documented instead was the truth. The first recording played. Elaine's voice, unmistakable, rehearsing her testimony. "No, that's too angry. Do it again. More scared, like you don't know what he'll do." Then her voice again, softer, trembling. "He made me feel like I was nothing, like I was losing my mind." The second recording. Elaine on the phone, laughing. A man's voice on the other end, a voice I didn't recognize. "He still has no idea?" "None. He makes me coffee every morning. I almost feel bad." The man laughed. "You're an artist, Elle. Take everything." "He deserves it for being so blind." The third recording. Elaine coaching David, her tone warm and conspiratorial. "Just be distant with him. Don't return calls right away. Let him feel abandoned. The lonelier he is, the more confused he'll seem in mediation. It's for his own good, really. He'll adjust." The fourth recording. Elaine discussing money. "The condo's already in my name. The accounts are set up. Once this is done, I'll have everything and he'll have nothing. He can die alone in some state-run facility for all I care. That's what he gets for 30 years of boring me to death." David stopped the playback. The courtroom was silent. I couldn't look at Elaine. I couldn't look away from the screen, though it had gone dark. "I have 700 additional recordings," David said quietly. "I'm prepared to submit all of them for forensic authentication. I'm also prepared to testify under oath about my mother's coaching, her financial planning, and her explicit statements about her intentions toward my father." Elaine's voice, when it came, was nothing like the trembling victim who testified minutes earlier. "He's lying. Those are deepfakes. He's always hated me. Richard turned him against me years ago, Mrs. Ellison." The judge's voice was ice. "That's enough. I looked at my son. He looked at me. And I understood, finally, what those 2 years of silence had cost him. The judge halted proceedings immediately. She ordered a full forensic audit of both parties' finances, not a request, a demand. She granted my attorney 3 weeks to file amended claims, including fraud and dissipation of marital assets. She noted for the record that the evidence presented raised serious questions about the credibility of the petitioner's testimony. Elaine's attorney tried to negotiate in the hallway afterward. A quiet settlement, he said, modified terms. We could make this go away quickly if everyone remained reasonable. I looked at him, this man who'd spent months painting me as a monster, and I said the first honest thing I'd said in 2 months. No. The audit confirmed everything. The hidden accounts totaling over $400,000. The condo purchased with marital funds. The systematic transfers dating back 3 years. The affair partner, his name was Martin, and he'd been receiving monthly loans that totaled $60,000, none of which had been repaid. Elaine's petition was dismissed. The court awarded me the family home. I received 70% of the retirement assets, a reversal of what she'd demanded. The judge's final ruling included language about a sustained pattern of financial deception and fraudulent misrepresentation that would follow Elaine in any future proceeding. She didn't appeal. Martin, it turned out, had another girlfriend the whole time. I heard this secondhand and felt nothing. I stopped attending hearings once my case was won. I didn't want to watch her collapse. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted it to be over. And finally, I live in the same house, but it's a smaller life now, quieter. I've learned that quiet isn't the same as lonely. David comes for Sunday dinners again. The first time he visited after the trial, he brought something wrapped in a soft cloth. He set it on the kitchen table and unwrapped it carefully. My father's pocket watch. The one I'd given him at his graduation, the one I'd assumed was lost or sold or forgotten. I kept it safe, he said, the whole time. I never left you, Dad. I just had to make her believe I did. I wear it every day now. I feel its weight against my chest like a second heartbeat. My son taught me something I should have known at his age. Loyalty doesn't always look like presence. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like silence that costs more than words. If someone is building a case for you, you may never see them working. You may think they've gone. You may sit alone in your kitchen, drinking coffee you made for one, believing you've been abandoned. Trust is quiet. Betrayal is loud. But justice, when it comes, speaks for itself. If this story reached you today, I hope you'll leave a subscribe if you haven't already. And I'd like to know if you're willing to share. Has anyone ever fought for you in a way you didn't recognize at first? Tell me in the comments. I'll be reading.